Hi all, welcome to Security and Privacy in Cloud, and I am J. Lavanya, Assistant Professor of CSE Department. So today we are going to see the Unit 3 Access Control and Identity Management. In this particular topic, we are going to discuss the subtopic called User Identification, Authentication, and Authorization in Cloud Infrastructure. Let us see one by one. So the first one is that here the main thing is that the user has to identify himself by means of giving some username or password and by means of physical access control. So we have discussed in the previous video about in detail how to access control in various cloud platforms and where it is used in real-time applications, advantages, drawback. So you can just check it out that video. So here in this identification, so first you have to give the username followed by the password and by means of physical access control. Once it is clicked, in the sense it will be passed on to the next authentication side. So here in this authentication, we have to perform some ambient authentication process, information through password, and by means of various algorithms, we can able to authenticate. And next is that authorization. So here in this authorization, we have to grant and we can able to deny access if the password or whatever, authentication if you're proceeding. Once it is granted, in the sense you have successfully logged in. If it is not created, in the sense you can deny that particular access and you can go for accessing that particular kind of whatever resources which is applicable. So this is a step to be processed. The first step is that identification, second one authentication, and third one is that authorization. So now let us discuss one by one. So the first one is that user identification. So in cloud environment, user identification, authentication, and authorization plays a major role or can be considered as one of the critical components of a secure access control system. And the user identification, it is a process of recognizing and differentiating users in a system, typically based on some credentials that are unique to each user. So based on the credentials which you're providing in that particular application or the account, it will be forwarded to the next access. Okay. So this is what we used to call as an identification process, which is commonly used in all over the platform or whatever, you should whatever type of application or you're using. It is mainly all those things stuff. So here you can see some demo process. So the user attempts to access the system. So the user will be initiating the access by entering the system through the means of some like username or password. So the user will be submitting the credentials, like it will be providing the unique identifier for identification, and the system will be checking from the identification database, like what are the verifies the credentials against the data. So it will be stored in the particular database. So whatever database which you're using, it will be just checked on that particular database. And once it has been verified, it will be automatically confirms, okay, this particular person has logged into the mail or something like that. Okay, so this is the flow of the user identification. The first one is that the user attempts to access the system, and by means of user submitting the credentials, it will be parallelly identification that from the database, and from there the system will be identifying the user. So the importance of this identification, it is a first step in confirming the person's identity. From this diagram or the flow you can able to see, and it must happen before the authentication as well as authorization. Okay, so users can also provide like more information like a government issue photo or ID or SSN, that is social security number, to further identify themselves. Okay, and identification happens in the initial setup stage of accounts and services, Like the main identification process is that we have to give the username and password to identify a person each time they access that account or service. Okay. So, however, like it can be challenging in digital environments, to verify identification simply by receiving the personally identifiable information, like username and password. But like like for hacked email account or a stolen wallet is also enough for someone to attempt to steal an identity. Okay. So forms of identification for authentication is that like by means of giving some password or PIN number or some answer to some security questions. And what you have is that it should be unique to a specific person. Like it may be of keys or badges or some swipe cards like that. Okay. So this is all about the user identification process. And next one, how it works in the cloud. So user identification, how would this work? Let's see. If you're going for the username and email ID, so by the users are identified by unique ID, such as a username or email address when they attempt to access a cloud system or a service. And next is that unique identifier. Okay, so unique identifier here, the cloud providers often use some unique identifier, say for example AWS IAM, user ID, or Azure Active Directory ID, something like that. Okay, so that are linked to each other. And next is that service principals or service accounts. So these are some special accounts which is used to mission authentication or allows some applications to interact with the cloud resources like AWS, or it can be of Azure. And like common examples, if you take like in AWS, by means of like ARN, what is that? Amazon resources name. In Azure, user's identity is tied to the Azure AD account, and by means of that, we can be able to access from the cloud. Next is that authentication. So authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or system to ensure they are who they claim to be. This typically involves some checking credentials, and here we could able to see the main authentication requires users to prove they still the person they claim to be during the identification phase or something like that. And in 2021 like there is a some incident happened, like more than 2.8 million reports of fraud, resulting in over $5.8 billion in losses. Okay, if identification was the only barrier between the access to an account or a system, these fraud and identity theft instances would be even more rampant. So authentication provides a layer of protection beyond some identification to help users keep their accounts and their identities secure. So like basically this is the overall flow of user authentication process. So the credential verification or MFA prompt and MFA verification. Okay. So the credential verification by means of MFA is nothing but multi-factor authentication. You can go for various types of authentication like single factor. We have already discussed in the unit 1 videos, I think. So you might just refer to that particular video. So how to access the multi-factor authentication or the multi-factor authentication verification. So this is the single by single layer will be formed in each and every step. By means of this, the user will be authenticating the process. Okay. Uh, so how it works in the cloud? So how it works in the cloud in the sense by means of single factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, and federated authentication. In single factor authentication, you could able to see this is the simplest form of authentication, which requires just a username as well as password. Okay. In multi-factor authentication, for added security, cloud providers strongly encourage or mandate multi-factor authentication, And also it involves using two or more factors. Example, like the user knows a password, something the user has like a smartphone for a code, or something the user is used some biometric scan like fingerprint or facial recognition. Okay, and it's just that federated authentication. So here the cloud providers will be using the federated authentication, which allows the users to authenticate by means of only identity provider like Microsoft Azure Active Directory, that is Azure AD, or Google Identity. So this means the users can use their organization existing credentials to access the cloud resources. Like common example, if you take like you can go for like AWS, it supports multi-factor authentication through devices like hardware multi-factor authentication tokens, or mobile apps like Google Authenticator. Next one is that Azure AD, that is like Active Directory, which supports multiple methods for authentication, which includes password based or certificate based and phone based, or it can be SMS or app notification, multi-factor authentication. And the Google Cloud here, it integrates with the Google accounts for authentication and supports multi-factor authentication through Google authentication or some security keys. And there is one more authentication, like what is that? Certificate based authentication. Like certificate based is essentially like CBA used to say. They uses some digital certificate to identify a user, device, or a machine before providing access to an application, a network, or other resource. So this form of authentication is more secure because it's based on both what the user has, like maybe of digital certificate, or what they know, like the password. Okay, and biometric based authentication. So biometric based authentication, like it's used in a college, right, where we are recognizing our eyes to sense while we are giving the attendance, the admin block, right? Similar to that, we can able to provide some individual unique biological characteristics to authenticate the identity, like methods like facial recognition, fingerprint, or eye scanning, or voice recognition, which provides a high level of security with minimal disruption. Okay, so that no one can hack, right? So that is the one thing. And when paired with the multi-factor authentication, so this biometric based authentication provides an additional layer of security. However, this authentication does present privacy concern and ethical questions somewhere. Okay, and next is that token based authentication. And token based authentication, uh, it simplifies the authentication process for recognized users after sorry after entering a username or a password. User can access the type of protected system without providing the credentials again. Okay, so this is about how it works in the cloud. And next one, like what are the authentication method, like password based authentication, as I told earlier, biometric based authentication, two-factor authentication, and OAuth or OpenID Connect. So these are used for some delicate authentication between the services, like using your Google or Facebook account to log into a third party app. Okay, so like if you take the advantages of using these kind of authentication is that, so there are so many advantages and disadvantages of authentication. So first advantages is that enhanced security. Okay, since we are using so many steps involved in authentication, enhanced security, like authentication which prevents unauthorized access to sensitive data and systems, reducing the risk of breaches and data theft. Second one, like access control. So there, uh, we used to have some with granular control over who can access specific resources and perform certain actions. And next one is that user identification. So authentication verifies the identity of users, ensuring that the correct person is accessing the system. And next, reduced risk of unauthorized access like multi-factor authentication, this is MFA, which adds an extra layer of security, making it harder for hackers to gain access even if one factor is compromised. Next is that protection against phishing attack. Like MFA can help protect a phishing attack by requiring an additional verification step beyond just a password. And next one is that improved user experience. Like as I told before, biometric, password authentication, all those things comes under. And compliance. So this we have already discussed in the access control policy. So there, authentication which helps organizations which meet regular the requirements and industry standards related to data security and access control. Like drawbacks, like it is a user frustration, extra security measures like multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, which is inconvenient for the users and lead to frustration. They are difficult to manage and require multiple steps. Next is that increased complexity. Implementing and managing authentication systems can be complex, which requires specialized knowledge and resources. And false positives like authentication systems can sometimes incorrectly deny access to legitimate users, leading to waste time and frustration. Next, privacy concern, like that is one of the drawback, like biometric data, which is highly sensitive, and it is misuse, which can lead to privacy violation. And cost, maintaining and implementing a robust authentication system can be very very expensive and it requires specialized hardware, software, etc. And like false sense of some users may rely too heavily on some authentication system, believing they are fully protected when they are not, leading to a false sense of security. Okay, so this is all about the authentication process. And next is that we are going to discuss about the authorization. So what is meant by authorization is that it is a process of granting or denying access to a resource based on authenticated user permission or roles. Okay, so here authorization grants users access like rights or privilege to a service or account or system based on previously secured identification and authentication. Identification or authentication validate a person's identity. So once the user is authenticated, authorization defines what action or resources they are permitted to access. And here, uh, sorry, and here if you take, so this is a user access control process. So here, like it will be checking the user roles as well as it will be following like evaluate access policy where if the role meets the policy requirements, it will be evaluated or it can be granted or it can be denied. Okay, so based on the decision on the role and policy check, the user access control will be working. And one more thing is that so here uh, sorry, and here there are so many types of authorization methods also, like API key, basic authentication, HMAC, OAuth. So API key is what is that? Is a secret code that gets you inside a system or a resource, essentially acting like an ID card to assign proper permission, track data usage. Say, for example, if I'm just using my ID card, like college ID card, to go to the library, right? So if they want to authenticate me whether this girl is a professor or a student in the sense, they'll be just scanning my ID card, right? So based on the ID card scanning, all the details will be fetched from the database and it will be just reflected. So once the permission is granted by the librarian, automatically I can able to access the books, right? So this is the user control simple example. Similar to that, it's a string of characters like API keys. We can able to request a service of an application programming language. Okay, and what is in the HMAC? So this is one of the types of authorization method. HMAC is nothing but it stands for key hashing for message authentication because it uses cryptographic trees to enforce the integrity and authenticity. Hashmark is similar to digital signature. A secure file transfer protocol like FTPS or SFTP, HTTPS, all these stuff protocols we should be using Hashmark to ensure the data integrity. And next one is that OAuth. So OAuth, there is OAuth, which uses some authorization tokens or a password to connect an app to a user account. It allows users to give other websites or applications access to the information without resupplying the passwords. Okay, so these are the types of I mean authorization. So API keys, basic auth, hashmark, and then OAuth. So how it works in the cloud is that um, role-based access control. So users are assigned roles, and each role has permissions that define the action the user can take. The system checks the user's role before allowing access to a resource. And next is that role-based access control. So access decisions are based on attributes like, as I told an example, like user attributes like department, or resource attributes like environment, or environment conditions like times of day. And access control list, in some cloud systems you can define specific permission for individual users, roles, or groups for specific resources. A cloud platform like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud uses IAM, that is Identity and Access Management, policies to specify which users or the services have permission to access the resources. And common example is that we can go for like AWS IAM policy, and Azure RBAC, role-based access control, and then Google Cloud IAM. And here in AWS IAM policy, you can able to define which user or the groups can access specific AWS resources like EC2 or S3 or Lambda with defined actions. Users can be assigned roles such as owner, contributor, or reader, each with some specific permission to manage resources in Azure. And in Google Cloud IAM, it policies defined role like viewer, editor, or owner, each with some different levels of permission to manage the resources. So these types can be also used in some authorization model with least privilege principle or separation of duties, that is called as SOD. Okay, we used to call as a simple term SOD. And by means of granular permission also we can able to access. How they work is that uh, like once the identification precedes the authentication, when a user tries to access a system, this like it will be first needs to identify the user, usually via a username, email, or a service account. So authentication verifies the user's identity. So if the user provides the correct credentials, so these kind of uh, authentics like password, MFA code will be authenticates them. So once authenticated, authorization kicks based on the user's assigned roles, policies, and permission. Like the best practices is that we have to enforce multi-factor authentication. We have to always use some special critical or administrative accounts, and we have to use some least privilege access, assign one of the minimum permission necessary for users to perform their roles. We have to periodically review and update the role and access control to ensure users have appropriate permissions. And audit authentication logs, we have to continuously monitor authentication and authorization logs to detect suspicious activity or unauthorized access control. And then role-based access, this is a common term, like right from the unit 1 to unit 3. So this term I think we have seen or we have discussed in so many videos, right? This role-based access control, so access control policy, and what are the types of role-based permission which is controlled by the user. So all these, so in detail, we will see or we will discuss in the next video about the RBAC, role-based access control. Okay, and Like advantages, if you see about the authorization is that uh, what is that advantages of authorization? So here it reduces the risk of data breaches and prevention of unauthorized activities, protection of sensitive information, and we can able to mitigate the fraud and unauthorized transaction. And also uh, uh, user will be experiencing and efficiently we can able to streamline the access management, scalability and flexibility, or efficient information sharing, and compliance and trust like accountability or compliance with regulatory requirements, reduced burden, all those things. The main difference between the authentication and authorization is that in authentication, user first step is their security access control, right? Then only there comes the authorization. So once the user is identified by the authentication, the next step is that in authorization, he or she can grant or deny the permission. And like common methods include like username, password, security question, code, and authorization. Permissions are granted, monitored by the organization. Like biometric and here role-based access control attributes. So it is visible and changeable by the user in authentication, whereas it is not visible or changeable by the user. So in this particular video, we have discussed so far about the the user access control, authentication, authorization, identification. So how he or she can able to access to the cloud and what are the advantages and what are the major drawbacks. Okay, so all these kind of stuff we have seen in this particular video. So we will see and the next video. Thank you all.